Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure to welcome Ursula and Mabe here. I'll just say a word or two about the format. Ursula and Mabe will introduce each other, and Ursula will give a presentation, and Mabe will respond, and then we'll open it up for discussion and questions. So I just wanted to say, by way of my own introduction, how important and inspiring Ursula's video essays and work with World of Matter, and Mabe's too, has been for my own work on the politics of the Anthropocene. And that's not just because of their critical, long-term critical engagement with, let's say, extractive modernity, but also a really willingness to consider and take seriously other indigenous ways of knowing the world and practices of being in the world, which I consider like hugely important at this moment in time. So she's really laid down some baselines and some examples and pathways that we're all following. And with that, I give it to you, Ursula.
Well, thank you very much, Jean, and also thank you for this lovely invitation. Jean and I have been a bit in conversation about these indigenous, about engaging indigenous communities also. But my first gesture will be to introduce Mabe to you, who is a long-term friend, and we've started to work together on the World of Matter project, which is actually we co-created and co-conceptualized this project in a collective way. And that's how I got introduced to her engagement with mining, analyzing mining in Brazil from an ecofeminist point of view. And later I learned that she's also been working with indigenous communities on creating a museum of sorts. And so we worked together on World of Matter, and one of the important events that we staged was actually done by Mabe in Belo Horizonte, which is really like a hotspot of the mining industry in Brazil. So I hope we continue to do many things together, and I hope that you will get involved sooner or later in this Columbian venture. Thank you for coming.
Sorry.
And Jean and Ursula for inviting me to be here. My role is a bit of a mediator or provocator to help Ursula to speak out this project, as she's so much in the middle or right at the beginning. I couldn't say at the beginning because she's been working with it already since a year and a half, almost 2 years. But sort of try to make her speak what she might not be remembering or willing to share. But we decided this afternoon, we have been working, as I'm not very familiar with all the projects, I'm following up at stages. But we decided to introduce each other, and I said, I'm going to probably need hours, because we have been sort of a long story in World of Matter. When she invited me, it was very challenging and changed my work, and it really gave me an enormous space for developing what I was doing, very lonely at the time. And the World of Matter was a gesture of Ursula of partially curating, but especially she established a group of work between artists and theoreticians that she put together, and we worked over almost 10 years in this platform. And first she started with a project called Egyptian Chemistry, and afterwards she did a second major piece called Forest Law in collaboration with another member of World of Matter. But when she invited me to participate in World of Matter, between that and establishing, really starting working, I was invited to participate into a committee for a PhD degree in Brazil, in Belo Horizonte. And it was a young architect, theoretician, who was doing a PhD thesis in geography. And Ursula was her main subject matter. And so I dived into a lot of things of your work that I didn't do through this PhD being done in Brazil at that moment. And she's Renata Marques, who was afterwards, she's a main architecture voice in Brazil today to speak about indigenous perspectives. And Renata got a prize. I don't know if you know that. She got a prize of for the PhD thesis of the year from the research agency. And this provided her post-PhD based on your work. You didn't even know that.
No.
Well, yeah, yes, there you go. So I entered her work through this other... it's nice to bring this out to, in a way, also have the dimension of the importance of the reach of the work of Ursula beyond Switzerland, beyond Europe. So Ursula is very influential in all fronts because she's an editor, publisher. She acted as conveyor and curator, even though she abandons this name and is much more like establishing platforms for her own work and where she puts together and feeding a lot of production around there. So it's not a curating that is exterior, but it provides a space for her own practice as well. So what we thought to do is to listen to Ursula for presenting this work she's been developing in Colombia. And we thought to open up questions from there. Maybe I'll do one or two questions at the beginning, but at this moment I would invite everybody to join in the conversation after we let her speak out for, just open up and give us an entry to what has been this project.
Okay.
So,
Good.
Thank you for sharing this project with us. And
I'm relatively happy to share this with you because, as you said, I'm completely in the middle, and what I'm presenting quickly here is by no means a kind of a formal presentation that I've been working on. This is the first time that I speak about this project in public. So I'll just tell you a bit how it came about, what I've been doing recently on the project, and then we'll see where it takes us. I was invited by a curator of the Museum of Modern Art in Bogota, that is located on the campus of the National University of Colombia. And I had already a working relationship with this curator, especially as she had shown forest law immediately after it was opened for the first time in Michigan, because it was a commission from there. And she knew this project was in the making, forest law, with Paulo Tavares. And she created a whole project around this work that was called the cosmopolitical forest, la selva cosmopolitica, at her museum. And since then, we started even more intensely to work together, because she's not only curator of that museum, of two different museums, but she's also the director of cultural heritage of the National University. So she thinks of the indigenous culture as the cultural heritage of Colombia, which is a very unusual, almost very unusual way of thinking about it, because Colombia doesn't conceive of that indigenous background as something that is hugely relevant to them. So as soon as this peace contract was signed in 2018, I got a phone call from Maria Belén, this curator, asking me if I wanted to go into this region that has been closed off from visiting by the armed conflict for about 30 years. So this region was entirely isolated. It was very jeopardized constantly, had received no development from the state. And Maria Belén said, I'll send you there on a research trip, and you just look around and see what happens. You don't need to give me any commitment to produce work. And she hired an environmentalist who knows all these indigenous communities that we were going to visit in the south of Colombia, in the region that borders a river that flows directly into the Amazon. So it's really Amazonian lowland. And then further up the Andes, where this Inga community was having its territory between the Andes and the lowland. And so he organized this trip. You need permission to enter the indigenous territories one by one. I was going to meet many different kinds of different kinds of communities, and I got ready, went on this trip, and 3 days before leaving on this trip, I got a call saying, "Oh, it's actually an indigenous leader that's going to take you around, and not this environmentalist." And I already realized this is also out of control already, you know, and I had no idea what was coming my way. And so this indigenous leader, Hernando Chindoy, took me around for a month through all these different regions. And on the very, very last day, he asked me, he said, "Ursula, I want you to help me with something we've been wanting to do for a long time now. I want you to help me set up this indigenous university." And I said, "Well, that's a really great idea. And I can help you establish some partnerships. Maybe I know people who are hugely interested in this subject matter of different forms of thinking, different forms of knowledge production, the environmental, the human nature relationship, the human earth relationship is very different." And I thought, yeah, I will call TJ Demas and some other people that I know who will be interested. And I returned to Switzerland. And the whole following month, actually, I kept thinking about this university, and I had absolutely no idea for one film. And so I thought, I have to take this seriously and follow this path and see if they really want to collaborate. And then he said yes, he wants. He sent me an official mandate to become a partner in the conceptualization of this university. And I still had to see with the curator if she agreed that my project will not be a film this time, but a university. But she said, yeah, it's okay. We'll work on this together. I'll support you all the way. And that's how this project actually came about. And ever since, I started to think about how will I go about doing this. I started to work with the ETH in Zurich. I have a contact there in the architecture department. And I wanted a partner also in Bogota. And I found one in the department of the Universidad Javeriana, which is an interesting private university. And that's how we started little by little to create a kind of a context, mobilizing a lot of people around this idea of creating a university together with the Inga. And the Inga are a people that derive directly from the Inca in Peru, but have entered Colombia about 600 years ago, and now they're called Inga. But they're a Quechua people. So we can talk about why this project was interesting to me, but maybe I run through some images so you get a sense of the territory. One of the major things that I managed to do is organize a big meeting in Mocoa, which is a capital of Putumayo, which is really the Amazonian state down there. Inviting about 20 indigenous people, plus all the the people in the universities in Bogota, who wanted to be or were already our partners. Apart from the National University was the Universidad Pedagógica. It was the UNAL, yeah, the National University, and La Salle. So there were 4 universities in Bogota that were willing to collaborate with us in one way or another. And I've invited them all, flew them in from all the different locations, and created kind of an atmosphere where we could, for 4 days, discuss what it is that could be learned and taught at this university, how it should be done, and how we should go about doing it, making this real. And so that happened, this big meeting happened now in October. And the following week I had these 2 classes of architecture students from ETH and Javeriana also come on a seminar week to that location. We were doing territorial research mostly. So this is the kind of territory that we're speaking about. And you can see that in many places the primary forest had made way to cattle farming mostly. They deforest to get farms with just a few cows on there, and that is maybe the biggest threat right now to the forest. This is just a map that the students pointed out where it's a little overexposed still, but you can see the river that comes here, the Cauca, that makes the boundary. It's the Caquetá River that flows directly into the Amazon. It's a really wide river. And anything that is north, Piamonte, before it starts really heading up the mountain, is the territory where this university should be built. It is adjacent actually to this green thing that is not only forest, but I think most of this is also the national park. It was made into a national park 2007. And the Inga think that this is really part of the territory. So, exactly. I mean, that's something maybe we can speak more about. What is this concept of university that these indigenous people have, and what is the concept of territory that they have? Because these 2 things are very related, and they have they are also a political catalyst, and they have a lot of meaning and function in that culture. And the place that we chose to hold this meeting is an indigenous cultural center, you could call it. ASOMI is the Association of Women Healers and Herbalists. This is just a drone image that we took. It's kind of in the middle of a very beautiful forest. And it's a bit like this. It's a very simple architecture, but it has places to sleep for 25 people. And the chagra, which is the garden, which is also a place of learning. And that's where we held this meeting, which was kind of inside an architecture that is kind of roundish, has a very strange shape, and is kind of the shape of a uterus. They had this idea to make this an architectural form. So we invited taitas, which is the Colombian name for the shamans, and every community has several of them, and we invited not only the Inga shamans, but also the ones from other communities, the Cofan, Camensa, and Sionas, who share the territory basically with them. They intermingle. These people, for the most part, don't have a territory that is kind of with a firm contour and own their little land in the Amazon. I think that's a fairly romantic idea of the indigenous that is, for the most part, not true anymore. But they kind of
have patches.
huh?
They have patches.
They have patches, and people kind of intermingle like that in the territories, and of course, in the meantime, there's also a lot of colonial settlers who come and who own land there. So we started with an opening ceremony where the room is kind of harmonized, and then there were kind of lots of workshops, presentations, and endless discussions. These two women here on the left, they have been directors. They are directors of high schools. And high school, they have indigenous high schools. But after the high school, that's the end of the education. Then the only thing they can do is actually go to the big cities and get an education in a Western style university, which causes a lot of problems for the community for obvious reasons. Either they don't come back after they finish studying, or they get an education that is much more geared towards being an employee rather than someone who creates possibilities for themselves and for a bunch of other. Plus, actually, they just learn a Western system, and that is in clinch with the indigenous way of knowledge production. On the right here, you see Hernando, who is the leader of the Inga. He has accomplished amazing things back in his village in the Andes. A lot of that entire region, of course, was based in either coca plantations, cultivations, or further up in the mountains, where it's too cold for coca. They had a poppy production and had actually a sizable heroin production there. And he changed this economy to a coffee economy. In the course of a few years, he invited all these actors, paramilitary, drug lords, and so on, to leave their land, to make this legally into a indigenous reserve, and start from scratch. That happened 15 years ago, and since then he has started to recover, rearticulate an indigenous way of life, an indigenous identity also, which is hugely politicized. So that's the kind of space we were in for 4 days. People were scribbling next to me on the boards. We had these group sessions where that gave everyone a chance to speak, because if you are in the big plenum, you have the same 5 people who speak. But we wanted to hear everyone in these little pavilions out in the garden. We also went on a walk where I have some footage afterwards. This is the curator, Maria Belén, who had invited me. I invited the curator, I invited the web designer who will work on the Indigenous University website. I invited all these players who are going to be in the project. I invited to come so that they all got a sense of what is happening there. He is from the United Nations here in Geneva. He was the moderator, and he did that very professionally, get these contents through, so that in the end we would actually have some kind of result. He did a fantastic job. What do you think this is?
It's happening.
Oh, it is? It doesn't show here. So these are just some shots. We thought it would be nice to, at least one afternoon, leave that space and go for a walk the whole afternoon, and every 10 minutes or so, someone would make a little presentation about their own practice. Some of the people already had, I mean, all of them were totally familiar with the indigenous way of life. So it was not like the indigenous had to convince us and explain us what's different about them. But still, the important thing was that they're very spread out. So the important thing was to bring all of them together. Many of them didn't know yet that there was a university project going on. And I told Hernando that I think it's important that the whole community will be in support and wants to contribute. This is just rushes. I haven't started to edit yet, but it will have a function. I had a film team to come and help us with this. This is actually. Why is this also blurry? There's also a Taita. Two Taitas. Anibal is from the Kofan. Yeah. Just so you get a bit of a sense of that space. The strange thing is that it doesn't show the whole picture, you know? Or maybe, this is an indigenous architecture that just happens to be there. I don't know whose it is, but it's empty, and we just used it to do one of the presentations in there. Their way of learning is very much embedded in the territory. It's all territorially based knowledge. They don't have a form of abstraction. Abstraction can be really useful because you can abstract from one content and then be able to apply this idea to a lot of other situations. For them, that doesn't make sense at all. They have a very practice-based form of knowledge, very territorially based. And so the walking through the land is actually a form of learning. Going to the river is a form of learning. Following that bio corridor is a form of learning, you know, and the chagra, the gardens as well. So to translate knowledge into text is not the most obvious thing for them to do, and I think that's not the way they're going to be learning in the future either. So I think as a video maker, to be using the media, audiovisual media, is more pertinent to their form of knowledge. And well, obviously, I have to do a lot of editing here. I have like 4 days of footage, but all the discussions, all the concepts, all the disputes, all the contents is there. So I think that it's a hugely important that I edit this and make this available.
Recámara. Tarde 2,3.
And it's even, yeah, it's... Yeah, but anyway, this is a young ethnobotanist from North Carolina that I flew in because he's done major research on the botany of a tribe that also came because their plant of ayahuasca, which is the basis of their culture in the Amazon, showed a kind of a degrading. They lost a lot of plant diversity, and they think it's climate change, but they want to find out if that's really the case. And he introduced some ways of diversifying the genetic material of that essential plant. And so I wanted to invite him to do the same thing with the Inga. So on the side of conceptualizing university, there are a lot of sidelines that need to be serviced, and to see what kind of collaboration we can start to make this university really an active place of knowing. And yeah, so he was very interesting, and he contributed a lot, actually. So I think we move on here, and in the end we made this group portrait where you see all of us who were working in there for 4 days, and quite a lot of indigenous people, but also some others. And you see these two flags, these colorful flags. You just pointed out to me today that this is actually Wafalia.
Indigenous.
It's the indigenous of the Andes, which pops up now everywhere.
Wibala is the name.
Huh?
Wibala.
Vibala.
Muipala.
Muipala. Anyway, I will learn this. And that it's very, very present in all these street demonstrations that are happening in the Andes right now. This is just one image from Colombia from last week. And so one of the outcomes, the immediate outcomes of just 4 days discussion was this little manifesto that we all signed. Even if it's kind of it's not very, very specific yet, it still meant, like, after 4 days we were able to put ideas on a page and sign it, agree on it, and we thought that was a great way to start this kickoff meeting, to end the kickoff meeting rather. And then the second week in October, the second week immediately following the Mocoa meetings, I took all these students to the field, and we went into the territory. These are the ETH student and Javeriana mixed. And to actually go to the territory is already like a day's trip. And we had to hike to that land where the university might be, where they had a piece of land available for this, in the deep forest. Took us 5 hours to hike there, which is to say that indigenous land is always at the outer rim of anything feasible there, that is far from transportation, or it's kind of very hard to work to make it fertile. These are the two Taitas who gave us the tour, who also spoke to us about the forest. This is primary forest here. I've rarely seen primary forest in my life, but this is amazing. Yeah, we went to see high schools in the area, indigenous high schools, and oh no, what is this? And had to cool off sometimes. So I think that after these 2 weeks, we are a huge step further. And the further I go into the project, the more there is to be done. I think it's going to be a 5-year project until we have something going on there. But as I told them, we don't need to wait until there is a built university. We can start now, right now, start building educational material, relationships, partnerships. We can build an online platform. We can do many, many things before. And also, from now on, all these people have to go into their community and start convincing them about what we're doing, because we need really a very broad support of the community. Otherwise, we'll build something that nobody's going to use. So, yeah. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea where that was happening, and now maybe we'll start a bit of a conversation.
Yeah, you just gave us a general idea, but you said this is a little manifesto, and I absolutely disagree with the little manifesto. It's a huge manifesto that they came out as maybe it's not the end product, but what you have produced in the last day is a recognition of the state of things. You know, it would be amazing to distribute this manifesto, I think, already. It's very rich to enter the situation and the needs they have. But I don't know how you're going to incorporate that to your work, but I think it's a major document that came out of this kick-off meeting. But why, you didn't, I don't know if it's clear to everybody, but why the Inga would need a university? Maybe you could say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, the problem there is really that they're kind of left off after high school with absolutely no perspective to go. There is no way of getting any kind of education in the field there in the region. You would have to go to the universities in the cities, and the educational landscape, the educational project at the university is a colonial system. You still have exclusively Western kind of upper class people who teach in these universities almost, you know, and so the distance to what their reality is in the indigenous territory is so far away. They learn a lot of things in the universities in Bogota, Medellin, Cali, but most of that knowledge is not going to be useful. It doesn't apply in the territory. So they learn maybe 80% of what they learn there is not going to be useful. And they don't learn the thing that would be useful. So they are immensely frustrated about that situation. And maybe before there were no indigenous students at all at universities. And so they came up with the idea of having an admission of of 2 indigenous people per year in a university. Two indigenous per year, so it's very little. At the time when there were no indigenous at university, that seems great. But now that there is a big push of these generations of indigenous who want to go to university, it's a barrier.
We were speaking about this today, that we have the same situation in Brazil, but with the government before the destitution of Dilma, the government started with quota for indigenous. So only recently we had for the first time a small generation of indigenous people who for the first time achieved the university. And this changes it enormously because they became lawyers, for example, to defend their people and their rights. Or they became artists for the first time, assumed in occupying a cultural space. And I learned through Ursula that this is a bit distant in Colombia is not the case yet. And it's definitely a way of defending and fortifying. But I think in their case, as you're saying, there's something important that as the land is related to knowledge. This means also occupying this land with university means protecting it, no? From what you said. And they strategically already drew a project that university is scattered in niches of knowledge cells. This way it's always also inhabiting and protecting this large territory that is a bit scattered. But so if we understand the reasons for the Inga in order to protect and to reivindicate a position as also, let's say, scientists or a knowledge that we recognize and be reproduced, what is the reason for you to get into this project as an artist? Why is it?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about this way of occupying the land through the university in a moment. For me, I mean, you have seen some of the works this afternoon, those who were in your seminar, right? Forest law, in forest law, subatlantic and acoustic ocean. I don't know if you saw that at some point. There is a kind of a recurring theme in there that has to do with this indigenous scientist that is usually a performer. Like in forest law, it's that forensic chemist who goes and takes samples, toxic, polluted samples of earth in the Amazon and the water. Or the shaman who lays out all his plants, which is about the medicinal knowledge that they have. And, well, subatlantic is kind of a scientist, but it's only a narrated figure, not a personified performer. But still, the idea of using the figure of the indigenous scientist as a way to address the fact how, at the same time, in the same historical moment, the constitution of science coincided with the colonization, and which also created this subject, this natural subject that was not part of the scientific rational discourse, which is really personified by the indigenous people. And I thought by combining that again with science and by saying also that there is another form of knowing that can have place here, that we need a greater epistemic diversity in order to change our relationship to Earth. It just became this figure that transported this, became a catalyst for this type of thinking, and that's what I discovered while doing work with indigenous people, actually. You know, it just started so in forest law, for instance, this chemist is, in fact, a chemist who is taking samples for a chemical lab in Quito, but he's also an activist who performs for international journalists so that they have something to film when they want to cover the story of the polluted Amazon. So he's kind of a scientist, but also performer and political activist, and I think that's a very interesting figure. And when Hernando asked me to get involved in an indigenous university, I was a bit in shock in the beginning, but I also felt I wanted to respond. I wanted to answer this call because it was an opportunity for me to continue to work on these same topics of indigenous epistemology and this intersection of science and colonial history. That this time I didn't want to just work representing in this representational tools of video making, but actually shift from that to getting directly involved in institution building in the field. So thematically, it was in an area that was very familiar to me, and I continue to be extremely interested in this, because I think it's important to intervene in this epistemic monoculture that they're experiencing there. Here, maybe not so much, but there definitely. And to open up and start to take on a different role as an artist in society, because I also think that to circulate only in the art world has also its limits, and I started to yearn for something a bit more this time. So that's why I'm interested in doing this.
I can continue asking, but maybe you can also join in.
Join in anytime.
Yeah. Yes.
Know more about the manifest, it could give us an idea of what the intention of this university will be, no?
Or maybe from what you heard in this meeting, that changed a bit for what you imagined from Hernando only?
Yeah, I mean, so far I've only been in contact with Hernando, because we've kind of organized what we have together for a year, almost, no? But I felt I wanted to hear many more voices, and I just lost it quickly. What did he ask?
About the manifesto.
The manifesto.
More about
so
the manifesto.
Yes, I mean, I was really, wow, I was like, so many opinions, you know? So many articulate persons who talk about what they want, what they need, why they want it, and so I think Ananda was maybe also a bit reluctant to have such a meeting, because he would not be the only one, of course, that can give form to this institution. But they together wrote up this manifesto, and then the next morning in this meeting room, we had it beamed up, and for 2 hours we together edited it live. That was an interesting experience, and so mainly it's actually very basic. It speaks first about the disastrous educational landscape that they experience, and because of that they really have a great need of being more specific. And then they just had a few, I mean, we can...
They claim for recognition.
Yeah.
They claim for better stature, and also that their voice be heard. It's actually very well written.
It is, huh?
Yeah, it's a beautiful document. I don't know how to either read it, it's a little bit long. It should come out somewhere in your work.
It's not my work, it's their
well, but
huge
part
effort.
of what you activate in this document is an extract. But you're also developing a platform, biocultural knowledge platform, which is an important outcome of all this exercise. As the same way that the platform of World of Matter has been key access to the work, to the project, how is it for you, this platform? You want to join in?
You say?
Maybe I just would like to ask, I mean, maybe this is already a step further, because a platform then is also a step of taking it further. I mean, I guess what would be a compelling question, Ursula, to hear in the terms of did you kind of wall, but also your self-understanding transform while joining this group of indigenous scientists, leaders, shamanists? I mean, I'm trying to get to that kind of concern or that question that is, I think, really important. What do you think was the necessity to call you into the project as someone that is able to bring something that would not process otherwise. So is it a kind of a mediating role? Is it a kind of a role that helps to discuss certain things differently? I try to get to this kind of figure of the artist that is many different kind of bodies or has different roles. Or, I mean, we discussed this also, I think, earlier, that these kind of bodies also transform yourself as an artist, but also becoming someone else. Because why did Armando ask you, as an artist, being in the international, but I think it is a good thing. It's like a complex thing, let's say, which allows Armando to do something that hadn't been possible otherwise.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't made any commitment or I mean, I didn't make them believe that I was going to deliver something to their community that is going to be substantial in terms of changing their problem, the conflict, or any of this. I think he just wanted to observe me for a month and see how I was holding out. And just the conversations we had, or I don't know what it is. Maybe I should ask him at some point, why is it that you... but I think not many people go in that territory. They have been very isolated, and they grabbed kind of the first one that walked down. It's like, fuck. And he tried, you know. It became clear to me that the state of Colombia will never fund or support this project, and therefore they are entirely dependent on outside partnerships, and you need a partnership of Colombian universities in order to make their teaching legitimate, so that they could have a program that would actually get a diploma in the end. And so I understand why, yeah, I mean, he tried. He didn't know if it was going to work, you know. I spent about 6 months writing a concept of what this could be, in conversation with a lot of people that I started to research and get to know. And I spent another several months finding the right people within these institutions. So everyone who came there is absolutely handpicked. Many of them I've met already through previous trips, the research trip and so on. And I think my role was in bringing them together. The concept that I wrote, the biocultural concept, which is kind of trying to bridge indigenous knowledge with Western modern science. That concept was only helpful in convincing partners to be part of this project. But I realized on the first day of having this meeting, I was very quiet during the 4 days. It was really not my turn to speak a lot. I think they all had a lot to say. And it became clear within 24 hours that they wanted this to be their project, that they had been thinking for years about this university, that they came with diagrams and this and that. And you know, I don't know, it's not just a different culture. To be in this indigenous communities is a little bit like being on a different planet, actually, because so many things of the knowledge and how they think about life is so unfamiliar to us, and has been branded as esoteric, as irrational, as mystical, as magical, or whatever. That was part of how they were constructed as a cultural other. And so, yeah, definitely it was a huge process of learning for me, basically. And also, it repositioned me within the process, or within the whole project. That idea of doing a kind of a biocultural audiovisual platform with ethnographies we would do with them about creating some kind of materials for teaching about their own knowledge, about their own culture, that I felt immediately as a complete impossibility right now at this stage. I hired these two filmmakers and a sound professional to do recording in really high quality, because I knew this is like a historical moment in not only creating this university, but really change also the discourse about what that could be in vis-a-vis the mainstream Colombian universities, you know. Because we will, in 2 years, we'll have a big exhibition at the museum in Bogota and a publication. So we have time to work towards this. But I have to treat very slowly, because I keep accumulating new knowledge about where I am in this. And
Just related to this. Sorry.
Thanks for sharing this. And when you were talking, I had many questions about very practical things, like you were talking about the website and like the high-end technology. You would go in there and film and create footage and all these things. And I was wondering about this, I don't know, maybe two sides of somebody coming in with the very, like Western tools, how we go into something and how we create our kind of knowledge, and then how do you encounter these other or different culture within this context, and then applying to the university that you want to create or build. I was wondering for who is the university, and by who is it made, and could I also go and apply to this university, for example, and what kind of knowledge would I get there? Like, it's many questions where I don't really am sure of what's
those are the questions I asked too, of course, exactly. Well, it's an Inga idea, you know, and it's an Inga-inspired project. But from the beginning, I also wanted to address the fact that if you come and do a university in a very poor region, and all the other communities don't get a university, that sooner or later will be a source of conflict. So we didn't want that. And so I insisted a bit to also invite other communities from the very beginning, not just when all the decisions were already made, and that you can say, yeah, well, the Assemblée Nationale has already decided now that it's going to be like this. This university will also be located at the edge of the national park, which is a huge area. It's 96,000 hectares. And the state doesn't pay anything for the monitoring or any maintenance of this park. It's just there. And a lot of people have started to go into this park, knock down wood, and start to make their own little coca field, and so on and so forth. So there's no protection, so to speak. So the university could become also a site to train people to start protecting this huge forest, which is, in the mind of the Inga, part of their imaginary territory still, from historically speaking. So this also puts the university in a place that could be interesting for foreign students also to come if they want to work with this big park, for instance, for ethnobotanists, for any kind of biologists, for all these people. But also, if someone is interested in doing that getting that kind of education, even if it's just like for a summer or for 2 weeks or for, I think it could be interesting to stay in contact with master programs and so on in the world. And I know in the States and in Europe there will be interested parties. And it could also become a way of financing a little bit the site,
Because there is a difference that if you come into this territory as, let's say, a botanist or a scientist to do your research, you know how it works. Or if you go there and you do it with shaman practices. That's my question, is it for bridging different...
Well, ethnobotanists usually go into the field of botany, but from an ethnographic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So very often they work with the shamans and with the community to complement knowledge, and I think that's for them it would be particularly interesting. But for anthropologists, of course, in general, it's just that they're very reluctant to invite researchers. Researchers is like a red flag, because researchers come and extract knowledge and walk away, and they get nothing. That's what ethnographers. Well, the ones we have here invited to come, they have done incredibly interesting work on with indigenous people for 30 years. It's not like they don't know what they're doing. She's an Italian who has been in Colombia for a very long time. She's written a beautiful text on doing research in an enchanted territory about how indigenous people do research, their way of doing research. Really interesting text, beautiful. And so no, there are a lot of perspectives that came. I mean, as I said, I handpicked every person. I went to Colombia to meet with them in person and said, no, this one is good, this one maybe not, no.
Related to what you were saying, I also had a question in relation to the 4 universities from Colombia who came, the representatives or collaborators from 4 universities. There is a forest university in the Amazon, in Acre region of Amazon, and they built this forest, but they needed collaboration from an established university. And the established university helped the implementation of this forest one. And in the end, they adopted this forest as a kind of branch, a luxury laboratory. And then in the end, it just sort of swallowed up the whole project and appropriated just to become an extension in the forest of this original or this collaborator university. As you have 4 Colombian established universities who collaborate, isn't there a threat there? Is it because you trust these representatives or these collaborators, or do you feel that it has a chance of, appropriation of some kind? You're not worried. You trust it.
At Javeriana, this anthropologist, I mean, with the architects, you have a short-term relationship. That's just the way it is. So I needed get other departments involved so that we can establish a long-term relationship that can be really a lasting support. And that was not easy to find, because the first interesting anthropologist that I approached at Javeriana, when I said it's a university, and then she asked me sooner or later, what do you want from me? And I kind of had to come out and say maybe a relationship, like a partnership. And she backed out. She was like scared. It was like too much, because you have this huge project that lands on your desk in addition to what you're doing already. So I had to be very careful in not overwhelming people too quickly with what I had in mind. And yeah.
But I was wondering, like this quotas system in Brazil, and for example, there's this intercultural university, Indigenous intercultural university in the University of Mato Grosso, where they have a program for indigenous people in Brazil, and actually they belong to this academia, but at the same time they are working with their own knowledge that they bring from their respective places, and they work in all of these things of ethno knowledge and all these things. So I'm wondering, like, what do you think is like the advantages of this university built up by indigenous people and for indigenous people in relationship with these other kind of universities, like that are mixed with the proper academia? I mean, in which way this new university, this indigenous university, can empower like these indigenous people in other ways that these mixed universities are doing right now?
Well, I would have to visit them to really understand in what way they're similar to what we have in mind, and to what they're specific to Brazil. Or
The thing which I feel in the case of the Inga is that they have no access. They either build for themselves, and they don't want to be colonized. They don't want the knowledge to come from outside. They want to be recognized, or they just stop as they stop in the end of high school. And there's another experience in this sense at UFMG, that the indigenous come to teach other indigenous. So what happens that Belo Horizonte as a city, it's a lot of difficulty for them because they have to come from all over to learn there. But what this did internally is that this course was so successful for all the other people of the university that they don't have little courses for 20 indigenous. They have 150, 200. So this becomes a huge success in order to empower and to really make circulate their knowledge. So it's the double hand which is transformed the university for the white students, for the students who have not knowledge about the indigenous. So it's really another way. I think it's another way. I think one doesn't eliminate the other, but I think there for them is the case that they either do it for themselves or they don't have higher education. And they want to learn, and I think it's something that is very interesting in her project, in the Inga project, more than Ursula's, is that they want to have agriculture as a knowledge better implemented, a better efficient knowledge in this field, so that also gives them an economic independency.
yeah, because they were so isolated, they really don't. I mean, Hernando understood right away that this university also needs to bring and to start building an economy, because they don't have one. And in the state university, they want to teach state fonctionnaires. They want to produce people who are going to work in the administration, cheap labor probably or something. So it's we have a big piece of land that's right next to the other one, that will be the agricultural learning fields, and that will produce the food also for the university, of course. So there's a kind of a number of circuits we are trying to produce so that they become autonomous, more or less autonomous, that they're actually can maybe also offer services with time. For instance, now in the region, every time you want some kind of analysis, like in the laboratory, about the soil, about the water, about this and that, you always have to call Bogota, and someone comes and flies down. That's a kind of service that they could learn and have a lab where they will start providing things to generate an income, or to start reforesting with carbon credits. I mean, we're looking into a number of possible economies that they could start from early on, you know.
Could I ask you both to talk a little bit more about the form of the pedagogy? You mentioned, Ursula, that this indigenous land-based and practice-based knowledge hasn't felt a need to translate itself into text.
Ah, yeah.
I mean, clearly it can in the case of the manifesto, but you mentioned that perhaps audio-video media would be a means to do it differently. But I'm wondering what is the current thinking about what that might be like, and Mabe, what in fact, how was the pedagogy in the project that you just described a minute ago? Is it different? I mean, in what ways?
It's different. It's transmission. It's oral transmission. There isn't necessarily writing, and it's accepted as what is accepted is that, like the shaman or the people who hold knowledge, it's through them to transmit, and it's not necessarily through books and booklets. So it's a lot of conferences and exchanges and settings like this. This is really the main dynamic, and it's trusted that this is how it also continues. You don't need printed books. It's through sharing. It's accepting also as a methodology that it's by gathering. And this is what fascinates especially the students, because they are also very good transmitters. And as they have never had a voice in the public space, and they have their own language, they have their own vocabulary, it's quite fascinating. It's a privilege because it's a direct transmission voice-wise and in the setting of exchange. So pedagogy is what we're living here at the moment the whole time. It's just being together.
But maybe I just finish that question quickly. I would also say that media is really not such an alien elephant there in this territory. Everyone uses iPhones, mobile phones, I mean. Everyone sends around images and videos and everything. This teacher who is running one of the high schools is a video maker herself. She does performances, and they got filmed, and they have a way to edit. But they also have a bunch of older media, audio recordings from later, on cassettes, which need to be transferred. I think we have to take care of that because it's by people who are already dead now, And so I think there's a lot to do in that area, and start creating materials that can be used for teaching one way or another. That's just what I wanted to add in terms of media, since you asked that. Yes.
Connected to this, sorry, but I don't want to speak on it. But because we saw this amazing, very colorful element. I don't know how to call this, because I think it's another form of writing. And a practice that is transmitting stories, and it's another form of text. Also, like the way how the chief was dressed. Did you discuss this? Because this it's not textile. I think it's something else. But not textile.
But
such a
text.
highly developed. Because although I'm trying to introduce this, we discuss at the moment a lot in the field of contemporary art, the post-ethnographic condition, to get out of this kind of ethnographic thing, and to consider this as a piece of contemporary practices that have a long tradition. And I wonder whether this was at stake, discussed in the.
Oh yeah.
This would be part of
everything is very coded also. Colors are very, very coded. And the women there, they weave these long bands, very, very kind of woven patterns that they bind themselves around the belly to highlight that area. That has a lot of kind of textual significance. And as well as these pearl bracelets, they have all these particular patterns that have all these meanings and stories in them. So And they might get lost, actually, if you don't do anything. And the shamans, they're not so eager to communicate their knowledge to anyone in the West. And every shaman has their own universe of knowing, of knowledge. With every shaman, this universe goes. And if he doesn't, if it's not saved somehow, I mean, the United Nations figured out in '91 that unless we save the indigenous epistemology, we won't have a biodiversity, because biodiversity is directly linked to the epistemic diversity that is localized. If the people who have the knowledge about that particular kind of forest, if that disappears, the forest is gone as well. It will not be protected, it will not happen, and that can happen within 5 to 10 years. And the Inga people feel that unless they now occupy this this forest, even through a kind of a symbolic occupation, through the use of the university, which takes place in many different sites in that territory, this will be gone very, very soon. Because there are campesinos who organize, they now want to also have protected territories. They moved in to buy land and privatize the whole thing, but now they claim they also want to have their own protected zones. And every time these bizarre movements take place, it will be at the expense of the Inga. Every time. And they just see this land shrink. Yeah.
Could I ask a question to follow that up about the political urgency of the project? You mentioned that it was an opportunity that opened up with the peace agreement of 2018, but now that agreement is in question. The indigenous are under attack in a big way in Bolivia and Brazil. I mean, how has the constellation changed since the project started, and how might that play out, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're hugely concerned because even in their own community, people disappear. Social, environmental leaders, particularly indigenous leaders, disappear every week. They get killed. I mean, it's overtly like. So what they do is go to the streets to claim that the police investigates, that that they act upon it. I mean, the reason why they are all kind of demonstrating in Bogota these days is exactly for that. The political constellation there is very complex and changes also quite a bit. I don't think the worst is that FARC has a small fraction that takes up the arms again. I think paramilitary groups or ELN are more problematic right now. And I think there's also suddenly there is now a Mexican drug cartel that gets active there. I mean, it's like, it's I don't know what to do about this, I think that this particular region where they want to have the university is it's a very dangerous region, because of all these players, and because oil extraction came in, and that means there's a lot of attention on the region when suddenly all these resources get extracted, and where you have oil workers, you have militaries to come in and protect these assets. So it's a lot of actors are there all the time. Every time I had to take all the students down from the bus again, they thought it was a great idea to go on the bus and travel up there, but there's no way you can do this in this territory. And for the 1 month that we were driving around last summer, it was in a blinded car, in a bulletproof car, because this indigenous leader is just so threatened. He cannot leave this car. That's the situation there. So, but we're going to do it anyway. It's just, we'll see how it goes.
I have a question. How can you make sure that the project being related to European and American fundings and United Nations, how can you make sure that it's not going to be taken over by occidental interests and ideology?
I don't know. How should I answer that? I mean,
Sorry, I didn't understand. You answered it.
well, so far, I mean, the people at ETH that I work with, and I think they hope to continue some kind of partnership, is, I mean, the architect that runs the studio, Anne Lacatan from Lacatan Vassal, they have worked a lot in Africa and in a lot of places. So I think I wanted to work with her because she has a very long history. They even had a plan also there to build a university, and in 10 years it has never been done. But she sees our work as a way, as a catalyst for them to think about what they want. She never intended to go and build something there. She never will. But the partners in Bogota, they might, continue to develop an architecture and actually build it. And we might even apply for money from the state of Colombia for the architecture, not for the running operation, but for the architecture that is especially meant for conflict areas. So we have a good chance to get that money. I'm not worried about what we need to build this thing. I think it's more interesting to think about why they need and what they want and develop that part. And that is something I cannot really help them very much, I think they have to do that. Yeah.
I think it's up to them also to defend in the same way that they have defended in the kickoff meeting that no, this is not exactly what we thought. We already have a project. They tend to be quite strong. This is why they're survivors. So they're able to push the limits and to push the barriers out as well. To say, we don't want this. This is the only hope for the survival of the university for them, is that they're able to say, okay, we don't want this kind of agriculture, for example, this kind of imposition or this kind of structure. So I think it's not so much your preoccupation, it's especially their preoccupation. If they want it, they have to hold themselves back and regulate in a way of defending how they want things. And I think they are very strong, otherwise they wouldn't be surviving in this area. No? They know what they want. And the way the women came in the meeting saying, we already have a project, already says a lot.
Yeah, just so much so that I felt like I have no place in this.
Yeah.
And I felt they don't want to do that biocultural platform either. And so I said, well, but then I realized I could do something with the material I shot in Mocoa, and this could be the start of a platform that follows, that documents that whole process of devenir université. So this is what I'm doing, and I feel I'm legitimate because they all signed a paper saying it's okay to film, and that I was there, and that and that we can do this and start making this whole process very transparent, very accessible, very kind of everyone can see what we're doing. I think that is very novel. That is very novel in this context. So I'll start there and then I'll see how it goes. And the maps that the students are making, all these new cartographies that will go on there. And if we continue with other projects in the field, this will be documented, it will go there, you know. We'll start little. I cannot come with a big, wonderful concept and then land there, you know. It's not going to work. So, yeah.
Do you think that the framework of like contemporary art, let's say, I mean...
of contemporary art?
Yes, I mean, because this is also that what comes into the conversation. I mean, I'm still trying to kind of mobilize a kind of a position of the artist in that project that is attached to an infrastructure that enables something else to do. I'm thinking here, like in terms of, I mean, do you think, Ursula, that this also could be like a possibility to create a support structure with the means that are at hand in terms of letting circulate a kind of the project also as a kind of as a means to back up the project? Because I'm still trying to figure out what I'm thinking of, you know, it's like in the context of this, I don't want to go into this, but forensic architecture, the way how they kind of commenting on the role of contemporary artists to create evidences in order to have another support structure for conflictual political kind of conditions, situations, where the role of the artist is almost like kind of an advocate of a cause. And this also changes the position of the artist. Do you have that feeling that this also could be like something where a resource is situated with all the complications?
Yeah.
And Forest Law operated a little bit like this also in terms of the case that was created.
Yeah, but less so. Yeah, it did. Forest Law was shown in 45 different countries. I think through that massive exposure, the Sarayaku project became a lot more known internationally. But they are also traveling a lot. They go to climate summits, and I mean, it's like by no means are they kind of isolated there in their little forest. I think for the first time I realized that the platform of these MOCOA meetings that I'm making is, I feel that the function of the images are for the first time something that really transports directly within the project and has a direct social function. That's the first time in my life that I really have that feeling, that I'm no longer working on a level of representation, but really get images to move things forward. That is exciting, I think. I've been wanting to do that, but it didn't know what that could be, you know. And then in the MOCOA meetings, it became clear to me this could be such a case, yeah. But I'm sure a lot more things will happen in the next 2 years, and in September 21, I'll have this big exhibition in Bogota. But I'm already getting approached by the art world, like on a regular basis now, to do something with this university. I said, stop, we have nothing yet here to show, you know. It's a different time frame.
There is a lot of questions, as we discussed.
Yeah.
Pops up a lot of
Probably
issues to debate. Yeah. So this is good already, rich from the project.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments? Sorry?
Maybe just to add something. I think the big difference is compared to other schools that artists initiated, and I just want to quote the School for Free Democracy of Boys in general. It was an initiative of the artists, and what is very interesting in your case is that it made have been your mind and where there was something floating and you have been engaged in pedagogy. I mean, this is not something that is new in your life, but it was really somebody who came with an urgency to ask for that. And so your position, of course, is quite different than what we have, what we know from history and from other artist projects for school. So you are much more, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I see you much more as a mediator, as you are the platform in a certain way, than an artist who comes with his ideas and want to bring the
To a
good
community,
words to
yeah.
the community.
Right.
Be asked.
That's definitely,
It's a commission.
I was commissioned. I was mandated.
Yeah.
I was mandated. It's a mandate. It says indigenous, the indigenous people of Inga of Colombia send mandate to. Yeah, I'm. Then I had a sleepless night after that. I said, "Oh my God, what am I getting into here?" Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you, Mabbe and
Thank
Ursula.
you.
I love
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.